Hi, and welcome to our next adventure in advertising, which will bring us into political advertising. And so we have to take a vow here to be civil during all this and not to offend and to try to keep an even temper. So that done, I would like to introduce you to a couple of videos that are interviews basically with Bill Moyers, interviews that he did with two people who were really largely responsible for shifting advertising onto television, which wasn't really done until the 1950s. And the first person that we're going to take a look at is Rosser Reed. And he's known primarily for these kind of hard-hitting commercials that featured a lot of repetition, like fast, fast, fast relief, or repeating a phone number over and over again. So techniques that are still used. And he came onto the scene with Dwight D. Eisenhower after World War II. And Eisenhower was an interesting figure because both the Republicans and the Democrats courted him. He was very popular during the war and continued that popularity after the war. So let's take a look at that first, and I'll come back and we'll talk a little bit about the next interviewee, Tony Schwartz, and we'll also take a look at a couple of contemporary advertisements. And so now, right before the elections, is a good time to get on your TV and see what's going on, and it's kind of interesting. So I will see you on the other side.
All right, let's take one of your most famous products, Dwight Eisenhower.
Oh, you can hardly include him as packaged goods, can you?
Well, what was the philosophy behind the Eisenhower ads? How did you decide to package the general?
Well, I didn't try to package the general. I did not try to put any words in the general's mouth. But the general was a singularly inept speaker. I remember that he had made a big speech in Philadelphia. I went to Philadelphia and heard the speech, and I think he covered 27 different points. And the next morning I had my research crew there, and I discovered that nobody knew what the general had said. He was all over the lot. And so we tried to find out what Eisenhower really stood for. You can't sell 27 things at all. So we selected 3. I wanted to select 1. The Republican National Committee wanted 3. And we picked those 3: corruption in Washington, the higher taxes, and so on and so forth. He was magnificent, did it all in one day, 44th Street at Transfilm Studios. We thought he would get through 4 commercials in the day, and he cut 35 or 40 in one day.
Did he memorize them?
We had some of the highest priced art directors in the world who were down on all fours lettering it on cards, and the general would read it once. He was a very fast study, and he played it perfectly.
Eisenhower answers America.
General, both parties talk about bringing down food prices. How do we know which party to believe?
Well, instead of asking what party will bring prices down, why not ask what party put prices up? Then vote for a change.
You know what things cost today. High prices are just driving me crazy.
Yes, my Mamie gets after me about the high cost of living. It's another reason why I say it's time for a change. Time to get back to an honest dollar and an honest dollar's worth. Eisenhower answers America.
I'm a veteran, General. What's wrong down in Washington? Graft, scandal, headlines. How can you fix it?
Here's how. By your votes, we'll get rid of the people who are too small for their jobs, too big for their britches, too long in power.
And at the end, absolutely exhausted, we were going back to the Commodore Hotel to have a drink. He mopped his brow and says, "Think that an old soldier should come to this."
Didn't you record Eisenhower's answers and then bring in people to ask the questions after they'd been recorded?
Well, as the commercials were written, and the general recorded the answers before we found the people to ask the questions. Yes, that is quite correct.
Eisenhower answers America.
General, if war comes, is this country really ready?
It is not. The administration has spent many billions for national defense. Yet today, we haven't enough planes for the fighting in Korea. It's time for a change.
Where'd you get the people?
The people were picked up, we wanted people from all around the country, and I think they were taken from tours of Radio City.
Tours of Radio City?
That's correct.
You asked them, are you a farmer? Are you a housewife?
Are you a farmer? And are you interested in Eisenhower? What questions would you ask? And then we'd say, would you ask that question? It was photographed on a separate day, and I don't see any great harm in that, do you?
It was a new technique.
It was the first time that television had ever been used to try it to help a president be elected.
You think it denigrated politics?
No. They were very simplistic commercials. They look almost naive in terms of modern television techniques.
And yet a great howl went up about merchandising the presidency.
Well, stop and think. Who remembers? If you remember Franklin Delano Roosevelt's inaugural address, people only remember one thing in it. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. There in the middle of an inaugural address was a 5-second spot, and that's all people remember. If you take all of Winston Churchill's great lines, you'll never have so many, owed so much to so few. Does anybody remember the speech in which that was embedded like a little fly in amber? It was a spot. It came out. It's what lingered in the minds of the hearers and in the press. So I simply decided that if that was what democracy is all about, why not tell more people? And I still defend the technique.
For president, Ike, for president, Ike, for president. You like Ike, I like Ike, everybody likes Ike. For president, hang out the banner, beat the drum. We'll take Ike to Washington. We don't want John or Dean or Harry, let's do that big job right. Just get in step with the guy that's hep. Get in step with Ike. You like Ike, I like Ike, everybody likes Ike. For president, hang out the banner, beat the drum. We'll take Ike to Washington. We got to get where we are going, travel day and night. For president, let Adelaide go the other way. We'll all go with Ike. President, you like Ike, I like Ike, everybody likes Ike. For president, hang out the banner, beat the drum. We'll take Ike to Washington. We'll take Ike to Washington.
Okay, we're going to move ahead about 15 years to the 60s, in the middle of the Vietnam War, and this is probably the most famous political ad ever made, and it's very simple, and Tony Schwartz came up with it, and you're about to see the ad, hear some discussion about it, and we will go from there. So see you on the other side of the Tony Schwartz interview.
5, 7, 6, 6, 8, 9, 9.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
These are the stakes. To make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark. We must either love each other or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
I'm Ronald Reagan. Every American should hear what Barry Goldwater really has to say, not what a bunch of distorters of the truth would have you believe.
The actor Ronald Reagan came riding to Barry Goldwater's defense in one of his first nationally televised speeches. But neither he nor other Republicans could save the Goldwater campaign.
Our opponents are referring to us as warmongers.
Well, Barry, in my mind, this is actual Tommy rot.
Even the beloved Ike couldn't help. Johnson won by a landslide. 1964 was some year in the evolution of political advertising. I know because I was in the middle of it. Seems a long time ago now, 1964. I was a young man up from Texas, a son of the New Deal, working for someone, Lyndon Johnson, who himself, 20 years earlier, had said that FDR was like a second daddy to him. I was a special assistant at the White House, and one of my jobs that year was to be a liaison for the president to the people who had been hired to create the advertising for the campaign. That was the agency of Doyle Dane Bernbach. They were famous for the Volkswagen campaign. Remember that marvelous slogan, Think Small. They also did the Avis campaign, We Try Harder. They were departing from the hard sell strategy of Rosser Reeves. And one of the men to whom they turned, I never met him, by the way, until a year or so ago, was a brilliant young fellow named Tony Schwartz. He was among the first of a new class of players in presidential politics, the media specialist. It's a long way from the torchlight parade of the last century to Tony Schwartz.
Have you thought about the vice presidential candidates?
For 20 years, scores of politicians have made the pilgrimage to this windowless sanctuary of sound in Midtown Manhattan. Here, Tony Schwartz has created some of the most effective commercials for Lyndon Johnson, Hubert Humphrey, George McGovern, and Jimmy Carter, not to mention Coca-Cola and Alka-Seltzer. Tony Schwartz began his career as an artist, but in the 1950s he began to experiment with tape recorders and launched a new career that would establish him as the Wizard of Sound. In his commercials, Schwartz aims at the seat of emotion far within the subconscious. He doesn't like the label soft sell that has been used to describe his work. This is no soft sell, says Tony Schwartz. It's deep sell. The Daisy spot is perhaps the best example of Schwartz's emotional deep sell. It only aired once in that campaign, and yet it is still talked and written about all these years later. Now, what does that commercial do?
This commercial is really a Rorschach pattern. Reminds me very much of the person who will go to a psychologist and be shown the ink blots and say to the psychologist, "Doctor, I didn't come here to be shown dirty pictures." And
the dirty pictures being
in their mind. Now, the dirty thing or negative thing, if anything, was Goldwater wanting to use or seeing as an option the use of tactical atomic weapons. People didn't hear the word tactical. They just heard Goldwater atomic weapons, Johnson no atomic weapons.
Or didn't this commercial exploit the seeming simplicity of Goldwater's statement?
Yes.
I remember that when it aired, the White House switchboard was jammed with calls. Many of the president's own friends got through to him. He called me and said, "What in the expletive deleted is going on here?" I said, it seemed to me that you did what you wanted to do, which was to remind people of what Barry Goldwater had been saying about atomic weapons. And there was a long pause on the phone, and he said, "Yeah, I guess you're right." Was it unfair?
I don't think so at all. I think it probably was right on target.
What did it do?
It made people aware of this basic difference, and it really showed the underlying fear that people had of atomic warfare. And I think Goldwater should have said the next morning that this commercial should be the theme of the presidential campaign, and I'd like to pay for half of its running. And that is, how do we prevent atomic warfare in our day and age? He could have killed that whole commercial that way, I think.
And he didn't.
And he didn't.
Instead, he reacted.
It fit. His saying foul says it fits. That's me they're talking about. We didn't say it, he said it.
Rosser Reeves said of commercials, "We realized we had a demon on our hands." Do you agree with that?
I came into it when it was already here, so I didn't see it as a demon, but I feel that it's probably one of the most important things in changing our lives, in restructuring our lives.
In what way?
I think that television has restructured the way we shop, the way we learn, the way we entertain ourselves. Just all the important things in our life have been restructured by television.
Has it restructured politics?
Absolutely. We find that the political parties are no longer the major communications force in politics. The networks are. You might say the three parties are ABC, NBC, and CBS.
What has it done, Tony, to the selling of presidents and political candidates?
I don't use, and I don't like the term selling the candidate. I don't use advertising techniques to, quote, sell candidates. Many people say you shouldn't sell candidates the way you sell soap.
Right.
I wouldn't even sell soap the way they sell soap. They try to throw things at the consumer. They use the consumer as a target, and I use the consumer or the voter as a workforce.
A workforce?
Yes. And that's the difference between TV commercials and print. They are emotional. You react to them. You hear and see things and react to them rather than go through the process of reading and thinking in a different ways. For instance, if I were to say to you, Mary had a little
lamb,
or for the rest of your
life.
Right. These are things that are stored in your mind from your experience in life, and I can evoke them with what I say. And that's where you become workforce in the process.
I become your workforce.
That's right. I use polling to find out what's in your mind in relation to the things we're going to talk about. We test before we do commercials. The advertising community likes to test their commercials. I find no value to it. We don't test the commercials, we test the public and see whether, after we've run the commercials, whether the attitudes they have changed. If they have, then the commercials are working.
All right, so I'm back, and I just want to end with a couple of ads, one from the Republicans and one from the Democrats, that are they're interesting and kind of for all the wrong reasons. But in watching ads over the course of this current election, and I want to encourage you all to do that, I'm really struck by how often some of the attempts that Tony Schwartz encouraged, like fear, for example, continue to rage on in the contemporary media scape. So in any case, these are probably more notable for being goofy than for being particularly effective. But here we go. 2 ads from the current ad, one Democrat and one Republican, with a link to how to find more. So I also want to encourage you to watch your TV, because we're going to be bombarded this next week before Tuesday. So see you on the other side.
Some people see a dumpster fire and do nothing but watch the spectacle. Some are too scared to face the danger, or they think it will benefit them if they just let it keep on burning. Others shrug and say, oh, all this talk of a dumpster fire, it's just fake news. There is an inferno raging in Washington. But here in the land of 10,000 lakes, we know how to put out a fire.
I am Richard Painter, and I approve of this message.
Everyone knows my husband, Ron DeSantis, is endorsed by President Trump, but he's also an amazing dad. Ron loves playing with the kids.
Build the wall.
He reads stories.
Then Mr. Trump said, you're fired. I love that part.
He's teaching Madison to talk.
Make America great again.
People say Ron's all Trump, but he is so much more.
Big league. So good.
I just thought you should know.
Ron DeSantis for governor.
All right, so that'll do it for this particular video, and I want to encourage you all to vote. I also want to encourage you to watch TV, which is something I normally wouldn't do, commercial TV in particular, local TV even more particularly, to get some of the ads that are going to be sweeping over the airwaves for the next week or so, and at least the next several days. And take a look at the link if you're interested in finding more bad political ads, which frankly, it isn't hard to do. So I'll see you later. I hope you're all doing well, and